should do some private equity, which he did. And I met a bunch of very, very smart guys, and I wasn't even sure what private equity was back in 1984. But I met this small team and introduced myself and our ideas about a bulk wine company. So lo and behold, they said, yes, we'll stand behind you. We'll come in and buy the bank's debt, which, by the way, the bank's debt at 20 million, we ended up buying the company back for 2 million. Which created another entrepreneurial problem. We had $18 million of capital gains. So I got my first initiation into what a Chapter 11 looked like, because to prove that you were insolvent, you had to, it was best if you filed Chapter 11. So we did one of the very early prepackaged bankruptcies back in 1985, and I was fortunate to come out of this. But I will tell you, you young folks out there, filing Chapter 11 is not a great way to burnish your reputation. It sticks like bad gum on your foot for about 10 years. But we ultimately moved on, and then in really late 1985, 86, I was very worried. We were basically struggling. We were still a struggling winery, even though obviously we didn't have the bank on our back. But if we didn't grow and we didn't get bigger and better and have better facilities, we would have gotten run over. I mean, it was clear there was other well-financed wine companies out there. So we found a very interesting transaction, and it was 11,000 acres of vineyard and a brand new, relatively new facility in the Central Valley. Back in those days, the oil companies all invested in big vineyards, and because I think that it was very tax effective for, sheltering income. But the Getty Oil Company at that point was trying to get out of essentially the wine and vineyard business. And so lo and behold, I went to our partners and said, why don't we take a swing at this deal? And remember, we had just bought the company for $2 million, and I wanted to go do this transaction, which was $43 million. And I said, I don't know how we would ever raise that kind of money. And our partners in New York said, no, we'll talk to a couple of savings and loans. And for those, again, the prime rate was very high, but then came the S&Ls that essentially acted as venture capitalists back then. And so I flew to Texas and we met with these guys, and I said, well, we need $43 million to do the transaction. And they looked at me and said, yeah, we'll do that. And I kind of looked behind me. I thought, God, who are these guys talking to? Nobody had ever wanted to loan me money before. And so we ended up putting this crazy transaction together. Now, mind you, when you take $43 million from an S&L, the rate was pretty high. Even then, it was, I think the rate on the notes were 10%, but they had warrants to buy 50% of the business. And but again, being young and relatively naive, sounded like an opportunity. So we went ahead, we did that deal, and overnight we were the largest grower in California. So the next day I got up and my assistant walked into my office, which is this it was a kind of this dusty office down in the Central Valley. And she walked in and she said, somebody from the Gallo organization is on the phone. And so I pick up the phone, and this woman said, is this Mr. Jeffrey O'Neill? I said, yes, it is. And she said, well, can you hold for Mr. Giulio Gallo? And I said, yes, of course. And I pick up the phone, and it's Mr. Gallo. And he said, Jeff, congratulations on your deal. You're now our largest grape grower. I said, terrific, Mr. Gallo. He said, do you have time to meet? I said, yeah, I think I can make time to meet you. And he said, well, how about lunch? I said, terrific. He said, how about tomorrow? I said, I'll be right there. So that was the beginning of a very long and wonderful relationship with the Gallos that went on until he tragically died in the car accident on his ranch. But one of the nuggets that I learned from Giulio, because we didn't spend a ton of time together, but every quarter we, of course, would meet and talk about grapes and the industry. And the one thing I learned was that company put you put the industry first and you put your company second, because without a strong industry, and I don't think it matters what it is, what the industry is, but he and Ernest saw it, but they also, of course, looked at it that, everybody else was an enemy below that. but it was always industry policy first, which was kind of a lesson that has stayed with me forever. So, so now we're here, we're rolling. We've got, we're, making ends meet. But again, you got to remember, we were selling grapes for $125 a ton. So $5 made a big difference back then. But we always made our interest payments and what have you. And then we continued to grow, and we added, a few little businesses here and there to the business, and we continued to grow it. Then, like all private equity, they need an exit strategy. So after 8 years, they came to me and said, can we get some liquidity? So we brought a new private equity firm in. Actually, we brought three that came in together to purchase the old private equity. And then all along the way, I was gaining shareholding in the company as we went along. And I think one of the other important things about private equity for everybody starting in business is, make sure you know who your partners are. Our first private equity group was absolutely fantastic. The second, half of them were great, and half of them, I did not see eye to eye. So ultimately what happened is I got in such a battle with one of them. I mean, he didn't trust me, I didn't trust him. It made for just a horrible working relationship. And finally, I went to the other private equity guys and I said, look, this is just not working. He doesn't believe in what I want to do, and I don't believe in what he wants to do. And they said, stop. We'll put together a plan and buy that private equity piece out. So that turned out great because we got, basically a bad apple out of our system. And then but they came back to me and they said, look, but we still want to sell the business in 3 years. Typically private equities last for 8, but private equity only pulls the trigger early when their other investments probably aren't doing that well. I said, look, I'm not going to go sell this company again. We just bought it 3 years ago from a previous private equity. So let's think about an IPO. So we did an IPO. We had Goldman Sachs take us out. We followed the Mandavi IPO, then later a Behringer IPO, and then we were going to be the first of a string of IPOs. Well, we got it off. It was great. Goldman was great, but O'Neill or Golden State Vintners was not a great candidate for a public company because we had the fluctuations of vineyard yield and trying to explain to analysts every quarter, what we were doing. Tell me about the bulk brandy business. Tell me about the bulk wine business. Tell me about brands. Tell me about private label. All of that, they said, yeah, I understand. And then 20 minutes later, they completely forgot about it. So and then of course, as you know, when you're buying grapes and the fluctuation in not only inventory but pricing, it was very difficult to predict the future earnings. So that didn't end so well as being a public company. So our stock, was highly valued when we went out, and then it just trickled down to a pretty low value. So the board said, this is crazy. It's expensive to stay public. There's really not a good following of the business, so let's take it private. So we did all the process and everything you need to go private, which involves, you can imagine, tons of lawyers and filings and the SEC and what have you. So we were basically about 2 weeks away from being completely done. And the one thing about going private and when you're in the public markets is anybody can overbid you if they have a legitimate bid. One of our customers came in. I think it was January 1st of 2004, and launched a hostile bid higher than our going private. So next thing you know, I'm sitting in the boardroom with our board of directors, and they're like, okay, Jeff, that's interesting. Are you going to stay in the boardroom and we'll just close the deal, or are you going to step out of the boardroom and create your own bid against this other competing bid? And occasionally I can be a little competitive. So I said, I guess I'm going to step out. But it was, I will tell you, heartbreaking to have somebody throw this wrench over the top and basically hit me over the head. I mean, it was absolutely staggering at the time. But anyway, look, we stepped out. Now I wasn't even on the board. They hired Citigroup to run an auction. So there I was raising money on the side. Ultimately, we did win the bid to buy the company, but you can overbid. And this other company was, well, hell, they were 10 times our size. So anyway, we bid back and forth. Every Friday my phone would ring. They'd say, Jeff, sorry, you got to raise all the money by next Monday. And if you're going to compete in a public offering, you have to have it completely financed with no contingencies, which was an interesting trick. But I had a lot of support from great banks, and ultimately I ran out of bank money, and then I had to go to friends, and then I ran out of friends' money, and then one day somebody called me, and he was a great advisor in my very early career, and he said, "Jeff, what are you doing? I'm reading these articles in the LA Times." And he said, "You're basically going back to where you were in 1985. He said, you were going to own 60% of this new business going private. Now you're going to own 20% with 5 times the debt." And I hung up the phone, and we sold the business that day. And so we sold it at noon. And then at 12:01, I started O'Neill Vintners and Distillers. So that's the genesis of how we started O'Neill. But it was primarily distillation, but we wanted to create more. We wanted to be in the bulk wine business first. And so, but we needed a facility that was state of the art. We felt if you're going to compete in that space, you had to have the right facilities. So we put our toe in the water, we started growing, and the more we spent and the better wine we made, the more customers we got. And then that business just continued to grow. And ultimately, when we bought the facility, it had about 17 million gallons in cooperage. In the following 6 years, we added 35 million gallons of cooperage. And so now the facility is about 50 million, but it was designed to make very good wines from, well, I think today we buy from probably 17 or 18 different appellations. So we positioned ourselves very interestingly. And one of the great transitions that I think happened was we could now create our own culture. When I in the early days with private equity, or when you're buying somebody else's business, you get the culture that comes with it. And so we got to create that. And one of the things that happened in it, I do laugh about it, is our we would be selling bulk wine to a customer, and we'd be in a big tasting, and I was always very honest. If I didn't like a wine, if we made it, I'd say, I don't think that wine's very good, which now our salespeople did not like it when I said that. So they gave me a new title, which was called the Sales Prevention Department. But ultimately, I think it is critical that you give customers, you're honest and just brutal about it. A couple of other little tidbits, when somebody says that wine tastes okay, okay is not okay. And the other kind of thing that bugs me is when somebody says that's the way they do it. And I think if you're really going to change, how you operate, you've got to think about how you want to do it and where that customer and really the consumer enters the fray here. So ultimately, we built this culture, but I will tell you, we missed one thing. We grew so fast, we weren't paying attention to the culture at the cellar level, the workers, those 250 people that pull hoses every day. The next thing you know, we were faced with a union vote, and I mean, it hit us on the side of the head like you can't believe. But it was a very big wake-up call. And what we realized is that you've got to talk to these people, you've got to communicate. And we basically did this incredible shift to communicating every week with everybody versus not communicating at all, or just assuming that they were happy. And I think one of the big nuggets here is listen to everybody, listen to the guy pulling the hoses in the cellar. I mean, I can't tell you how proud I am when I walk through that facility and somebody will come up to me and say, we ought to be doing this way, and this would save time if we do it this way. And that culture, it's hard to do, but if you actually take the time, listen. So our team, we do a lot of that. And then we also share a lot of information with them. We share them about where our business is going. We tell everybody what our goals are, why we're in the branded business, why we're in the bulk business, what are the opportunities, where is the industry growing, who are we concerned about? And then either you kind of believe what where we're taking it. And I also have this other rule, which is called no drama. Everybody in the world's got a personal issue, right? Just don't bring it to the work. It's we want to make sure we create a positive environment. So our kind of motto is if you don't believe in our vision, we'll help you find a new job somewhere else. And we've been pretty firm about that. And look, it's a work in progress, but Then we went on to develop a branded wine business. And part of that reason is because we wanted to touch the consumer. We wanted to know who was drinking our wines. And quite frankly, we had customers on the bulk side that we think they kind of lost their way. And we were reliant on them making the right decisions about brand building. And so we said to ourselves, wow, we don't want to be totally reliant on that. And that's why we launched the branded business. And we've been fairly fortunate there. This year, we'll do about 1.7 million cases. I think, in 2021, we'll do just under 2 million. So we've got it going pretty good. And, and the team's all, firing on all cylinders, and that's where we're headed. So the last topic before we turn it over to questions, is social responsibility. And one of the magical things that I've discovered is when I started O'Neill, I mean, we got to create the culture, and it has developed substantially over time. But one of the big things is really how do we think about it from a social responsibility, and of course that encompasses a lot of things. But let's just talk first. It's the first is probably sustainability, um, and we're trying to be very aggressive there. We were probably one of the first big wineries that said to all of our growers, you have to be certified sustainable by 2022, or we will not buy your grapes anymore. And that was a game change for some of the growers. I mean, some of them, it was just too difficult. But ultimately, look, we have to make sure that all of our growers are sustainable. But the question is, what's the future from there? And we think it's around regenerative farming. And I mean, really, if you can't at least try to execute in a commercial way for essentially protecting the planet. But that regenerative farming is really kind of just a new term for carbon sequestration. And so we'll see how that goes. But we've got some big experiments going on at Robert Hall. We think being able to tell that story is going to be quite valuable. And if we can figure out how to do it on a very grand commercial scale, because today it is done. There's no question about it. I mean, Paul Dolan's done it. There's a number of epic wines in Paso, but they're doing it on a relatively small scale. We need to figure out how to do it on a scale that makes a difference. And then of course there's all the issues that our winery in Paso will be B Corp certified, which is really some great guidelines around, I mean, everything from how you treat your employees to pay to sustainability. I mean, it kind of encompasses a lot. So our goal ultimately is to bring that to the mothership, and I mean that will be a big challenge, but we want to be on it. Social justice is another area that we want to play a part in. Look, I mean, when they had the George Floyd issue and the Ahmaud Arbery, and I mean, look, that was a wake-up call for America. And so we reached out to all of our employees and we said to everybody, we did a town hall and we said, what should O'Neill be doing here? And we got some amazing volunteers. They all came up. I think we still have 30 on the committee. They came back and they said the best way we can advance and make some progress is through education. So that's what was kind of the genesis of the scholarships that we've created. So we've got two now, one at Sonoma State, one at Cal Poly. We hope to add a number of others, but the idea is it's very, very focused though. It's BIPOC. So it's very focused. We're right in the middle of picking the first two candidates, which is going to be really exciting. And I think if we can make it happen and grow it, we'll bring in a much wider world to make it work and work on a much larger scale. So our goal here is not just to get somebody through college. It's actually not only to get them through college, it's to bring them through mentorships and bring them through internships in our industry so that there is a pathway that makes sense. And I think our industry has got a lot to do in that space. So with that, I'll stop and turn it over to questions from there are no off-limit questions, and that's the way I like it at O'Neill.
Oh, thanks, Jeff. That was an awesome story to tell us. It sounds like you've had quite the adventure from the beginning and some ups and downs. So there's a lot of things we can talk about. I loved your section about kind of really focusing in on the culture. That's one of the things I've learned over the years with my businesses is really understanding how to create and sustain that culture and listen to the employees and be able to communicate on a regular basis makes a huge difference in the long run. So great lessons for any aspiring entrepreneurs out there. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and by the way, anybody's always welcome. You're all invited to visit the big winery down in the valley, or Paso Robles, which is Robert Hall, and see, because what I love nothing more than sharing how we do things with people. I mean, I got to tell you, in the early days, back in the early 80s, I was afraid to show anybody the winery. I mean, we would try to steer them through so they would not see these horrible production methods and old facilities. Now we're just we want everybody to see it because we think it's best in class.
I think it's an awesome opportunity. I may take you up on that.
I
Thanks,
love
Jeff.
it. I love it.
That's great. So I got a few questions coming in from the audience. I want to make sure we have some time to go over that kind of thing. A lot of great stuff going on. I think a lot of these are kind of from your early stories and then some later, lessons here as well. Like when you're talking about, your journey through the adventures of capitalism in those early days was interesting. So, one of the questions that came up, is how did you get into business with the private equity group in the first place?
Well, it was really kind of luck, and I mean, I will say, uh, I was so fortunate that the trustee that the bank had put in place turned out to be this just brilliant businessman, a guy named Vic Palmieri, and that was my connection. I mean, I had not one connection. I mean, you got to remember the banks wouldn't loan us any money. Um, and Victor said, "Look, I think I know some guys that can help you out." And so it just steamrolled after that. And once you get that first introduction, that's really how the engagement with private equity.
So another question from the same person, Andrew Chalk's been asking, do you think any wine companies go public? Can you name any success stories in that realm?
Well, there's really not many. I mean, look, the one that was public, the most successful one, and will always probably be, I mean, is Constellation. You got to remember they started as a small public company, but when they were a wine company, I mean that stock price was up and down and sideways, and now they've morphed into a beer company. But I mean, really, I mean, I bet it's probably 85% of the earnings come from the beer business, and a lot of it from the spirits, and I mean, it's still some from the wine, and they're still actively involved, but clearly that's a public company that is really a beer company, not a wine company today. But there's a pretty big wrecking yard of, I mean, treasuries, stock has been in the tank. It's a very tough place to be. Obviously, Mondavi, they got caught, with Bob making some big commitments, and ultimately were, forced to sell. But there's, and then everybody I think knows the Chalone story. I mean, that was a wine club that was publicly traded. So, it's going to be interesting. You've got Duckhorn, you've got the Vintage Wine Estates. Some of them are blended, bulk production and private label and brands, and then you've got Duckhorn, which is a pure play, and I think it'll be interesting. But it's hard to manage earnings in the wine business when you have this fluctuation of inventory based on yield and pricing.
Yep, great lessons for everyone along the way. So another question from John Francois, our dean here at the Sonoma State University in the business schools. Like, uh, he wants to ask, Jeff, what trends do you see in the wine industry, for the next 10 years?
Well, I wish I had a really clear crystal ball. One thing that I think we're going to have to develop is we're going to have to figure out how to talk to millennials and Gen Z, because I still don't feel like we are. I don't have a solution around it. But clearly their drinking habits are different than Gen X and the baby boomers. But you can see, I think what the future, I mean, the future looks like, more offerings. I mean, those generations are now coming in with flavored wines, and you know, I don't know. I mean, I know it's hard for a traditional winemaker to gag it down, but Stella Rosa is going to sell 7 million cases or something this year. And, and they've got every flavor under the sun, including, plain old sparkling red wine. So, I think we're just going to have to make sure that we understand not only what the right products are, which appear to be leaning a little sweeter in the future, um, which is a little bit of a surprise to me, but I think that's probably the changing demographics in America. And I think as wine companies, we have a responsibility to sort of think about who's the consumer at the end of the day and how are we taking care of them. It's not about us standing here saying, this Sauvignon Blanc should be super dry. It's about what do they want? What makes that Sauvignon Blanc special to a consumer? And maybe it's sweet, maybe it's with maybe a flavor. I don't know, but I think we've got to be listening to the new generations. Like the baby boomers are like they are what they are, and the Gen Xers, they're kind of coming along and looking a lot the same. I mean, I hope millennials and Gen Z all look like that, but I think we're going to have to give them products that are probably a little more interesting than where we've been.
Yeah, exactly. Back to your advice earlier about staying very closely connected to your customers and your end consumers, right? Things change. You got to make sure that's an ongoing process. We good advice for all of us to kind of understand to stay in touch.
Yeah. Look, and I think data is going to play a huge role. I mean, as everybody knows, I mean, as we got to this omnichannel distribution network, I mean, there's so many of them, but I think we have to pay attention to almost all of them, and then you got to just pick the horses you want to ride.
Yeah. So another great question here from Lindsay. Can you give us some tips, for first steps for somebody who might be interested in starting a distillery?
Wow. Yeah, I don't know that I have any great tips for starting a distillery. At the end of the day, I think if you have an interesting product that's unique to you, um, I would say that that's a hard space to go today. Other than maybe to think of a distinctive product that potentially has some volume. I mean, we think about it from our perspective. I mean, we think about it on the brandy business, which is a part of the business that hasn't really seen any type of a renaissance. But we think there's an opportunity, and I believe partly because we haven't given products to the consumer that they want. It's just been the same old ones. But um, starting a distillery, that's not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of them out there. And again, it depends on what's your goal. Is your goal to be the next Tito's, or is your goal to? Yeah, I had a very interesting conversation. I probably should leave his name out of this conversation, but I was on a small panel and everybody kind of gave an idea about what they did. And this wine person said, this is, I get to take my kids to school in the morning, and then I go to my office, and then I do a little marketing. And this very well-known business guy at the end, he said, that is not a business, that is a hobby. And I went into hero mode and tried to defend this poor person, and he was relentless that was a hobby. So I think it just depends on what's your goal, because you can be for sure very happy with a small distillery somewhere, and making it more of a lifestyle. But I think if you have a commercial aspiration, that's a little different story.
I got another question here, Jeff, from Damien, where it asks, can you give us a few examples of what you feel illustrated a grower that kind of lost their way? Said, I think we have a similar situation occurs with specific students in the wine business. So I think it's a good one for the students to hear about.
Sorry, is the question about growers getting them to convert to our? Was that what? Say the question again.
The question said, do you have examples where you feel illustrated a grower that lost their way?
Well, look, I think it's kind of interesting. So one of the things we do, and I hope this is on point to the question. I'm not 100% sure, but we do a lot of. I love talking to growers, and we love telling them where we're going, because nobody ever tells these growers where you're taking your business, and they act like they're just like part of system. It's like, take your ticket, get in line, and show up. And we think we should tell everybody what we're trying to do, because we want them engaged with us, and we want them, understanding our culture, and and if the cultures are aligned. But it's been kind of cute, particularly when we're doing a conference with a bunch of growers, and we'll have two or three generations there, and we'll explain to them why they need to be sustainable. And usually the father or the grandfather says, "I'm not going to do that, it's too expensive." And then I'll say, "Yes, but no, look to your right at your granddaughter. um, she'll help you, she'll do the paperwork on that." So the only thing we've guided growers on is, you've got to think about it in the future, because it's not an option. And yes, it may be a little bit more expensive, but your other option of not selling your grapes, that's a really bad option.
Good point. That actually leads really well into the next question, Mark, when you mentioned about, talking about granddaughters, right? Is like, how does your company plan, for coming challenges of climate change, especially as it relates to wine growing? Do you follow any specific climatic models to help guide your thinking?
We don't. Obviously, we're well aware of it. It doesn't appear to have affected quality anywhere in the state, but I think we all know it's here. So does that mean, do we hedge our position by being in Washington or Oregon or somewhere else in the world? And I think the answer is, you've got to think about that. And then I think probably what's going to happen is, we'll just see these certain varieties just will not be available in certain areas, or in the case of Pinot and Chardonnay, we'll probably push towards the coast. Yeah, I think we all have to think about it. I guess I'm optimistic that we'll figure out how to slow this climate change down, but maybe maybe that's being a little too optimistic.
I think we're all hoping to be optimistic for that. And in the long term, I guess the shorter term question I've got here was more one of, what's happening right now with COVID. Kent asks, I'm curious about your view regarding shifts and changes in the wine industry in response to COVID, specifically wine distribution in kegs.
Yeah, well, that's been, look, I thought the keg idea was the greatest idea ever, and I actually helped found that free flow, whenever that was, because if we're going to change the way the world looks at us from a environmental basis, what is better than giving everybody great wine, and then having a recyclable container? Um, so I think, unfortunately, when every restaurant in America is shut down, it's really thrown a wrench into that operation. But I think ultimately, it's going to be a fantastic opportunity that will continue to grow. The company was, on a great roll. I was always a fan of the stainless steel kegs, because they're recyclable versus the plastic kegs. But I think the business is here to stay, but it's just unfortunate that COVID has changed so many things. O'Neill was fortunate, or anybody that was in retail, did fine. As the consumers shifted, it was fine. So obviously we lost 15% or 18% of our on-premise business, but it was all made up for on retail. But if you were heavily into either kegs, or you're an on-premise wine company, which is how you build brands today, is on-premise, this has been a brutal time. And then I think some of the companies, you've got to figure out, how do we navigate the digital marketplace? And we've got all these different channels. How do you get on Instacart and Drizzly? And the consumer has so many options now. And if you're a wine company, you have to make sure you can sell. Which channel do you pick, and how do you understand it, and how do you get to the top of the list? So it's been an amazingly challenging time. I just take my hat off. My team is just, I describe two types of companies in the COVID era: those that sat down in the morning, got up and said, "How are we going to fix this?" And those that said, I guess we better go home until the government tells us how to fix it." So I put my team in the camp of, let's go solve these problems, let's move on. There's stuff we can change, and there's stuff we can't. But this has accelerated the digital space, or really that whole marketing, e-commerce. It's advanced it by 5 or 7 years in one year.
Yeah, it is amazing how you see these things come up as a crisis and an opportunity at the same time. And you're going to see a lot of advancement on that. They've been talking about the scientific advancements with the vaccines are going to make a huge difference in the future with other things. So hopefully that will help us in a lot of different ways. Your thoughts about the marketing and the analytics leads really well into Matthew's question. He said, "How do you use marketing analytics in your business, and do you mainly contract this out, or you do it in house?"
We do a little bit of everything. It's a it's a great question. I wish I had a brilliant answer, but if you look at the data and the analytics, right, we used to always look at what's happened. So that's the Nielsen, and you look at that and you say, okay, here are certain trends. Here's how I'm being successful or not successful. Here's what everybody else is doing. I think the question is what is how does the data in the future look like? I was on a call yesterday that was pretty fascinating, and it's about how do you tear apart a wine and then determine whether the consumer is going to like it or not, and then try to decide what attributes. And then they're using AI to try to determine what the future ought to look like with that particular blend. And I mean, it's obviously millions of data points. So I think I would call it a work in progress. We do a lot of the old school, look at the Nielsen's, try to guess, walk through the supermarket. And then, the real question is how do we take consumer data, that's wine related or a specific demographic, and then how do we figure out where to carry that into, the interest of a consumer and the future products. But I don't, at least I'm sure maybe some wineries are there. I don't think O'Neill's quite there yet.
Another question that came up I wanted to dig into was, what are your thoughts on O'Neill making strategic investments in agricultural technology and services startups that align with your sustainability goals?
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. Come and talk to us. We'd love to hear about any ideas. For example, I mean, we're doing a regenerative farming experiment in Paso Robles, and we basically have taken 40 acres and said 10 acres of sustainable farming, 10 acres of biodynamic, and 10 acres of regenerative, and then the technology around that and measurements and drones and how we're going to apply pesticides and what have you, and try to keep it, organic. So there's all kinds. I mean, obviously there's robotic, pickers and you name it, robotic tractors. How do you minimize that footprint in that vineyard? And clearly one of the big areas is going to be, I think, around delivering maintenance and analytics, because of with drones. And yeah, there's a number of obviously opportunities there. And but yeah, I mean, we think you know there's going to be some amazing developments here, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, a lot of new things coming out and doing it. It's great to see you staying on the forefront of that. So I also want to switch over and talk a little bit more about your earlier discussions about your experiences with people, and also the relationships with other organizations. So one of the questions that came up is what qualities or values in people and organizations do you look for when determining whether or not to do business with them?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in the early days, we took everybody's business. I mean, we had to. We didn't have a choice. Um, but now, when we talk about retailers or bulk customers or what have you, we have a very robust internal discussion about what are they doing, how are they operating, and what do they look like in the future. So we do that. We do a lot. I mean, it's hard to do, though. I mean, you want to kind of have a pretty broad brush, but my view is, look, I'm doing this because I love it. I think we can build a great company. Um, and if we're not paying attention to our customers and how they're thinking about it, and if we're not aligned with their values in the future, I mean, what the hell? I mean, it just strikes me as, I mean, you can't get up in the morning and be excited about just, trying to figure out how to lower your cost. Or, I mean, to me, what excites me is, how you get up in the morning and you talk about how to make it better, how to make education better. I mean, all the way through, whether it's one of our farm workers or, one of our salespeople. I mean, so I think that's the way we think about it. And I think the customers that we want, that are really building for the long term, are the ones we want to focus on.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Especially the part about education. Spend a lot of my time trying to focus on that and the young people that are coming up to make sure they understand those things too. So that's a great lead into Gary's question. It says, Jeff, what is your ultimate vision for your life and your company?
Well, thanks, Gary. Great, interesting question. Look, when I think about our company, I don't think about legacy. I don't think about any of that. I think about the team that built it. I think about the work that they did to make it successful. So when I think about the business, I think about the people and what does that look like in the future. Um, Fundamentally, growth is always key. There's just no getting around it. I mean, if you're going to be on the leading edge and you're going to be spending money on regenerative farming and drones and you know, robot tractors and what have you. I mean, you better be on the front edge. Personally, and I for all you young students out there, I mean, I never thought I'd be here, trying to be a coach and a guide, and I never thought we'd be able to make a difference in sustainability and social justice. So, yeah, so Gary, so my thought is, your job is never done, in that area, but we have such a great opportunity, and if what I always find annoying, especially with my wealthy friends, probably shouldn't say this out loud, but they're always talking some bullshit about, their construction projects delayed and, just a bunch of nonsense. So I sort of say to myself, okay, you can actually use your, uh, in that case, whether it's a company or your money or whatever, you can actually help in some small way to change the world in a very positive way. So I think the short answer is my life goals are to continue what we're doing and just make it bigger and make it better and make it, to continue to just push on these, issues that make people's lives better, better income, better education. And then the future is on this line. I mean, I don't know, I see a couple of old guys in the screen here, but the future is you young people under 35. I mean, that's where it's at. That's the Gen Z, millennials. That's where I spend all my time, and of course, we have a bunch of them working for us, which is amazing. And I get inspired from what they're thinking about, and they're thinking about way different things than my generation thought about. I mean, I think we were thinking about buying a sofa and putting the curtains up, and they're much more thoughtful, honestly, about what the future of the world looks like and social justice and making sure the companies that they deal with are responsible.
Great point, Jeff. Thanks. One last question for you. I think that leads in really well for the
Thank you,
young
Jeff.
people. Someone is starting their own business. What would your biggest piece of advice be?
I don't know. I didn't know where I was going when I started. I said earlier that naivete is a valuable commodity, when you're young. I guess I would say don't compromise on your values. And then the other is when you go out and you're raising that first fund, make sure you know who you're borrowing that money from, because that will help guide the future. And a lot of times, where they want to go is not where you want to go. So I guess that would be my small bit of advice.
Well, awesome advice for everybody and a great discussion. Really appreciate it all. I wish we had time to get through every question. I have a lot more, but we're running out of time here. But this has been really great, and we really appreciate you taking the time, Jeff. I'm gonna switch over now and to hand it over to Sergio. He's going to do a short announcement about some of the activities going on with our Seawolf Entrepreneurial Pitch Competition.
Thanks,
Thanks, Chris.
Chris. And thanks, Jeff. That was an awesome presentation. I just want to take a few minutes of your time to encourage everyone to apply to participate at the 2021 SSU Seawolf Pitch Competition that is coming up next month. The competition will be on Tuesday, April 20th, from noon to 1:30. And the deadline to apply is March 30th. And all SSU students from any major or program are eligible to apply and participate. At least one of the members of the team should be an SSU student, but there can be participants that are not from SSU as long as one person is from SSU. The pitches will be delivered either by individuals or teams and will be judged by guest entrepreneurs and business leaders. The next first Tuesday's event for April will actually talk about tips for delivering an awesome pitch. And I'll let Chris tell you more about that. But in the meantime, I'll post the link to register for the event here. Again, the registration deadline is March 30th, and the pitch competition will be on April 20th at noon. And here's the link on the chat with more information. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Sergio. We're really looking forward to seeing what we come up with this year. That's been a great event in the past, and this is going to be really exciting. So I hope everybody can join in and watch as well. And if you are interested in helping us become a judge, reach out to us as well. So that's great. So I want to thank everyone for joining us on the event today. We really enjoyed hearing about Jeff's entrepreneurial journey. That was a great story and a lot of great advice. I think it's pretty incredible that we get the opportunity to learn from a wine legend based here in the North Bay, has had such a dynamic career and entrepreneurial trajectory along the way. Michelle, Christina, and Tony and I are very excited to connect with aspiring entrepreneurs as our role as entrepreneurs in residence here at Sonoma State. So we're available through that website. If anybody wants to get some advice, we can put you in touch with, we give you lots of advice ourselves and put you in touch with other people as well. In fact, our next First Tuesdays event coming up in April will feature a roundtable of business mentors from SCORE, the nation's largest network of volunteer expert business mentors, along with other experts who will be discussing best practices when pitching new venture ideas. Details of the Seawolf pitch competition will also be discussed, including the structure of the event and instructions for pitches and presentations. Again, make sure you sign up ahead of time because the deadline is the end of the month, so it'll be before that. But join us on the first Tuesday of April at this same time between noon and 1 p.m. on Zoom. Again, you can register online to the link that Sergio just mentioned will be in the chat. It's sbe.sonoma.edu/entrepreneurship. So again, the deadline to submit your application is March 30th. And this is a great opportunity for business students to join with engineering students and other disciplines. And we'll have the opportunity to win $10,000 in cash prizes. Most importantly, this year, we have very exciting plans for a follow-up program. So for the very best of the pitch competition participants, we'll be able to continue working under the supervision of our entrepreneurs in residence and our faculty through a structured approach for launching new ventures. So outstanding projects in wine innovation and entrepreneurship will be allowed to pitch in the Sonoma County Wine Growers Association Pitch Day this summer as well. So that'll be through our Vineyard Innovation Through Science Initiative, VITS. So please stay tuned for more details on that. So we have a lot more coming. So a lot of great things going on here at the university. You can find out more about the pitch competition. There's a link in the Zoom chat as well for sbe.sonoma.edu/seawolf-pitch-competition. So please check that out and see what else you can learn about that, and encourage anyone that might be interested in entrepreneurship to get involved. So appreciate everybody's time today. We're really excited that we've got more of these coming. So stay tuned, and I just want to say thank you all and say see you next month.
Thanks.
Thanks
See you
again,
next month.
Jeff.